In this video, we dive into the shocking case of a teenage girl who stepped over a horrifying line, murdering her own parents in a bizarre bid for online attention. This young teen used to love watching makeup tutorials, dancing with her friends, and posting humorous clips on TikTok. Then, on a typical weeknight, her parents were discovered dead in their bed, the most devastating event imaginable. The world grieved alongside this girl who had suddenly lost her parents, particularly when she turned to TikTok to express her sorrow. But beneath her heartbroken appearance lay a far darker reality. This is the story of Sarah Grace Patrick. When authorities got a call at 7:15 a.m. on February 20, 2025, they responded with urgency. On the other line was the voice of a young girl. She was sobbing so intensely that she struggled to speak clearly as she described the situation unfolding in her family home. Sarah Grace Patrick, 16 years old, was the one calling. It turned out her 5-year-old sister, Jay, had made a terrifying find and rushed back to her room. That was because she had woken up a bit earlier than usual and entered her parents' bedroom only to see them both lying there. When officers arrived, they took Sarah and Jay, who were both deeply distressed, to get professional support. Meanwhile, the police entered the house to investigate. At first look, everything appeared normal. In fact, the whole residence looked tidy, with no indications of a forced entry or any disturbance. But when the officers made their way to the second floor, the scene shifted dramatically. The children's bedrooms were neat and orderly, yet the main bedroom held something awful. As the police stepped through the door and examined the bed, they saw Kristen and James lying cold. Initially, it seemed as though they were simply resting. But upon closer inspection, they spotted something more. Blood covered the pillows and bedding, and both grown-ups showed signs of multiple gunshot injuries. What stood out was that investigators could determine almost immediately that the wounds were not self-inflicted due to the paths of the bullets. Naturally, this ruled out the possibility that one had shot the other. Kristen and James were pronounced dead right there at the location. From the state of their bodies, law enforcement also realized they had likely passed away several hours earlier, before the girls had risen. As an additional note, the son was not present with the family that evening, leaving only 4 individuals inside the home at the time. Now, with 3 children left without their parents and 2 adults slain in their own beds, the authorities faced the grim task of determining exactly what had occurred. When the police first examined the crime scene, the house itself revealed an odd narrative. Apart from the master bedroom, every other space was perfectly clean as always. Nothing was misplaced throughout the property, the place was orderly and spotless, and there were no marks of any struggle or attempted intrusion. Moreover, nothing had been stolen from the premises. Given all that, it essentially eliminated the chance of a botched robbery. After all, why would someone slip upstairs and shoot a sleeping couple only to skip searching the rest of the house? The officers could not make sense of it. Honestly, it did not add up to me either. Detectives began to believe that whoever had pulled the trigger that night had targeted only Kristen and James specifically. To add even more confusion, however, one key detail emerged quickly from the crime scene. No firearm was ever recovered, which complicated the investigation further. Their neighbors lived quite spread out, making it unlikely that any nearby security cameras would provide useful footage. In the following days, the police conducted a detailed search of the entire property, hunting for the tiniest bits of forensic clues. At the same time, extended relatives announced a $5,000 reward for information leading to the person responsible. Kristen and James Brock, the parents, along with their 3 children, Sarah Grace Patrick, 16, her younger brother Donnie, and her little sister Jay, 5, formed the household. They resided together on a lovely rural property near Carlton, Georgia. The area was ringed by open fields and woods. Sarah and Donnie came from Kristen's earlier marriage to Daniel Patrick, a rocky union that concluded in divorce during July 2018. This added further difficulties. As often happens, custody issues took center stage in their conflict. Both sides battled for primary rights, but the court ultimately granted joint custody, with Kristen holding the main responsibility. Daniel ended up in a tough position. Regrettably, he could only visit them during holidays and every other weekend. This limited him to brief visits with his children. Not long afterward, Kristen began seeing James Brock. They fell for each other fast and started living together, something described as a whirlwind romance. Naturally, James took on the role of stepfather, and it appeared he handled it well. Later, when Kristen and James welcomed their daughter Jay, the family finally felt whole. The Brocks gained recognition in their local area because they regularly attended Catalyst Church in nearby Carlton. James enjoyed cracking jokes, while Kristen was the outgoing, warm, and compassionate one among them. From local reports, it also looked like their kids were well regarded by neighbors and the broader community. On the surface, the family seemed like a content, faith-centered household from the South. But in reality, matters were far more complex. It emerged that both James and Kristen had struggled with substance issues in the past. Their problems had grown so severe that they ran into legal difficulties. Kristen faced a significant drug habit, which contributed heavily to her split from Daniel. As a side note, this was also a primary factor in his push for custody. Although little is known about Daniel, it is understandable why he felt concerned. He worried that Kristen's drug involvement was damaging the growth and well-being of both Sarah and Donnie. And it turned out James Brock dealt with similar challenges. Court documents showed that the Patrick side presented a contrasting account, however. They claimed that renewed belief in God and stronger family bonds had offered them a fresh beginning. They were committed to moving past those difficult periods. At least, that was how it looked outwardly. But the reality was that Daniel remained doubtful. He also suspected that Kristen and James were merely pretending to satisfy child welfare officials. He felt deeply anxious because his perspective differed sharply, and he believed his kids were frequently exposed to meth and marijuana in the home. The situation worsened for him when his son Donnie arrived with a mark on his body and claimed James had struck him with a belt. It came as no surprise that he contacted social services the very same day to request another look at the custody setup. Just 2 days before Christmas in 2019, he took urgent action. In his filing, he stated that both of his children appeared neglected and were also overdue for medical and dental checkups. He was not alone in his concerns. His 11-year-old daughter, Sarah, submitted her own statements saying she preferred to live with her father. Sarah would later confide in her teacher that she feared returning home because others worried about her safety. They involved the police, and she repeated the same details to them. She even mentioned discovering drug wrappers in the house that carried the scent of meth. Having a parent who uses drugs is serious enough. They can become harsh and neglectful, but using them around their own children makes it far worse. In a sense, it fell to her to inform teachers and law enforcement about the situation. It should not have been that way, but no one else was stepping up to fix it. It is regrettable that the courts did not award Daniel full custody, yet his emergency petition seemed to gain him some additional time as he received custody over Christmas for 4 days. The picture grew bleaker for Kristen and James as further details about their history surfaced. Around that time, Child Services learned that James already possessed a criminal background. They discovered he had been arrested in 2017 for methamphetamine possession and received probation. The following year, he breached that probation through various offenses including shoplifting, theft, marijuana possession, and interfering with an officer. He faced extended probation and jail time for those violations. It became evident he was not demonstrating reliable parenting. The case against Kristen and James continued to build. And by October 2020, the court had finally adjusted the arrangement. After that, Sarah and Donnie would reside with their dad during the weekdays and visit Kristen only on selected weekends. Although Daniel did not secure complete custody, it represented meaningful progress toward safety. In his view, it helped create a more secure and steady environment for his children. Even after winning that custody adjustment, Kristen and James encountered further issues in December 2022. This time, a different kind of crisis hit. Tragically, James experienced a sudden major heart attack, and physicians determined he was already in advanced heart failure. They warned he would not pull through without immediate surgery. He did survive, thankfully, but only after doctors installed a left ventricular assist device, which functioned like a mechanical pump to circulate blood throughout his body. You will have to take my word for it, but all of this connects directly to the case. To keep it brief, James's pump included a monitor, a unit he kept with him constantly. Any irregularity with his heart would set off a very loud alert. Also, these safety measures were guaranteed to activate reliably. Even though Kristen and James had faced setbacks before, circumstances appeared to be looking up for them by early 2023. You would be surprised by how much the tension between Kristen and Daniel had eased, given their previous conflicts. And all three parents were spotted together at some of the kids' activities, sharing the same space and conversing amicably. Since family matters seemed to be stabilizing so well, what unfolded on the night two of them were fatally shot appeared baffling from an external view. Kristen and James did not seem to have any recent adversaries, at least not in the preceding years. There was little motive for anyone to harm them unless some lingering figure from their drug-involved history resurfaced, but subtle fractures were beginning to show beneath the calm family facade. For example, Kristen and James might not have been the healthiest match for one another. It is documented that their relationship soured roughly a year prior to their 2022 wedding. When James petitioned the court for a protective order against his fiancée, he expressed fear for his own safety and that of his daughter. They had a fierce disagreement, and Kristen got into the family vehicle with Jay and Donnie still seated inside. She then attempted to drive into him while he stood in the barn. Additionally, he claimed Kristen had struck him repeatedly, smashed objects, and even made death threats against him. He also suspected she might have shifted from street drugs to prescription medications. But here is the puzzling aspect. Ultimately, James chose to withdraw all his complaints. The protective order against his fiancée was never finalized, and they proceeded with their marriage in December 2023, mere months after the filing. Or had James simply concealed the issues to preserve the family image? Had Kristen truly improved? What remains even more curious is whether any of this linked to their deaths or if it represented nothing more than another tragic element of their past. Based on the bullet trajectories, we know neither was at fault in that regard. As the evidence indicated, neither Kristen nor James had aimed the weapon at themselves and then at the other. This confirms someone else carried out the act. But who, and for what reason? The crime scene offered no further insights, unfortunately. There were no DNA traces or fingerprints left behind, and no evidence of any break-in. That evening, both of their former partners were located and accounted for. And with no indication of an external party, the police had to turn their focus inward to the only other individuals present in the house. It feels difficult to accept that we are discussing children. But that night, Donnie was staying with his father, so only two others remained. There was Jay, who was just 5, and Sarah, who was 16. And as the investigation progressed, officers noticed that Sarah's version of events did not quite align. As days stretched into weeks without any arrests, the local community rallied to support the three children. Activity continued behind the scenes, however, and interest in the case grew, particularly within true crime circles. And let us just note that Sarah's daily life was not adding up smoothly. Sarah, much like many teens her age, spent a great deal of time online and maintained profiles across numerous platforms. She had accounts on Instagram and Facebook, but TikTok stood out as her clear favorite. And let us just say she began sharing content frequently on that app in the weeks following her parents' deaths. Now, to give her credit, there is no single correct approach to handling grief. Everyone processes it in their own way, and I can only imagine the horror of losing your parents so abruptly. In this instance, though, many observers would consider certain aspects of Sarah's online activity unusual. It did not take long before viewers, and even some relatives, started raising questions. Let us return to her initial Facebook update before examining TikTok. Sarah had to type this message on her father's account 4 days after the shootings because police had seized her phone as evidence. She described waking up to her sister's cries and then discovering her parents shot on the floor. In addition, she noted that some details in the media reports were inaccurate, though she did not specify which. She also wrote that she was praying for the individual who had killed her parents and loved ones. She further expressed gratitude to her church for their prayers. A few weeks later, a funeral took place at Catalyst Church. Sarah delivered a speech in front of hundreds of attendees, and the entire event was captured on video. I am unsure exactly what she intended when she apologized. It could be that she regretted breaking down emotionally in public. Or perhaps it carried deeper meaning. Whatever the cause, it lingered in people's minds, and it would resurface later as more individuals questioned Sarah. Following that, Sarah continued uploading to social media, primarily on TikTok, for several weeks, even a month after the incident. In late March, she announced on her dad's Facebook page that she would share all future updates via TikTok. And to encourage more followers, she invited people to join her there. The reason I mention this now is that her TikTok profile has since been removed, likely on the advice of her attorneys. But the internet retains everything, and enough of her clips were preserved and later shared again. For Sarah, the content does not reflect well in hindsight. It was Sarah who created a video of herself weeping, with mascara streaking down her face, set to a popular audio track. They do not realize it, but a year from now, my 5-year-old sister and I will discover them shot dead in our house for no apparent reason. They will miss seeing me graduate, walking down the aisle, or even saying farewell. A montage of cheerful family photos followed a brief clip. When the video opened, there was an abrupt shift to an image of Sarah preparing for a gathering. The following shot showed the funeral. Many found the transition jarring and mismatched in tone. In another clip, Sarah stated, "I can't stop blaming myself because I didn't wake up before my 5-year-old sister had to find them." In yet another, she said, "It breaks my heart when I hear her calling out for her mommy and daddy." Young people who have endured trauma were sharing raw and difficult truths. Reactions across the public were sharply split. Some offered sympathy while others grew doubtful. But Sarah did more than simply post on her own account, because by June 2025, only a few months after the deaths, she reached out to a true crime TikTok creator known as Allegedly and requested that they feature her parents' case. This is where matters grew even more questionable. Sarah would describe the murders of her parents as receiving major attention and even supplied inside details. Now, the creator did produce a video on the story, and Sarah could be seen leaving comments on it. As expected, this sparked a broad mix of reactions. Some viewed it as her effort to maintain public awareness of the case, while others saw it as turning the tragedy into content. It was obvious that Sarah cared deeply for her mother, and nearly all her posts centered on how much she missed Kristen. For weeks, her sorrow appeared sincere and understandable. Yet things seemed to shift by early summer. What had looked like genuine mourning from a daughter now began feeling performative. And when observers examined Sarah, one recurring thought was whether she was truly grieving or whether she was relishing the spotlight the tragedy had created. And that question extended beyond online discussions, since investigators had already started examining her discreetly by then. The investigation took a major turn in July 2025. Even after months of intensive effort, the police had uncovered no proof of an outside attacker. With that in mind, they had to consider what they once thought unthinkable. Also, given how the victims were killed, was it possible someone inside the home was responsible? Out of the 5 family members who could potentially be involved, let us begin with James and Kristen. They were the victims, so they could not have done it. Then there was Donnie, but he had been elsewhere that entire night. Meanwhile, Jay was present. She was only 5 years old at the time. That left just one remaining possibility. Clearly the individual who had phoned the police and who claimed to have been asleep through the gunshots and James's alarm. If you examine the details more carefully, you can identify the person who might have possessed both motive and access. Obviously, I am referring to Sarah. In early July, officers concluded they had gathered sufficient proof to bring charges. So, they obtained a warrant for her arrest. By July 8, she was taken into custody. The entire neighborhood reacted with disbelief. Nevertheless, the investigators felt certain about their conclusions. Later that same day, the sheriff's department announced her arrest. They stated there was substantial evidence, and conversations with the FBI had reinforced their position. The police have withheld many specifics about Sarah for now because the case remains active. So, at present, all we can do is assemble what limited information we have. Let us just acknowledge that quite a few elements do not line up. Even from this partial viewpoint, let us start with the front entrance. Investigators reported no signs of forced entry and that the property otherwise looked undisturbed. One door was found open that morning, which was the sole unusual detail. This might have been staged to suggest an intruder, or it could simply reflect the family's normal habits. Since they lived in a low-crime area and kept pets, it was plausible they sometimes left a door ajar overnight. The notion of an unknown intruder grows even weaker when you consider the complete absence of any unfamiliar fingerprints or DNA. That led to the crime scene itself. It was orderly both inside and outside. Nothing was damaged or missing. And whoever carried this out appeared to head directly upstairs, fire multiple shots at two sleeping people, and then depart. It did not resemble a typical robbery attempt gone awry. It felt deeply personal to the perpetrator. Let us conclude by reviewing Sarah's account. She informed the police that she had gone to sleep around midnight and had not even said goodnight to her mom or stepdad, something her family describes as out of character. Additionally, she told officers she had remained asleep the entire time, meaning she would have missed all the sounds, including the gunshots. She claimed she only stirred when her younger sister Jay entered crying the next morning. This is where inconsistencies begin to surface, however, because Sarah offered a different version on social media. In one of her TikTok videos, she mentioned hearing her dad's heart monitor roughly 20 minutes after going to bed. She described it as so loud that it could be heard above the television. Even if she was not the shooter, the video implies she was awake during key moments of the incident, including the gunfire. Sarah provided two conflicting narratives, one of which raises serious questions. Despite insisting she slept through the alarm, the shots, and the commotion, her sister reported hearing the loud gunshots, casting further doubt on Sarah's reliability and story. With no evidence of forced entry and only one door left open, police discovered scant proof of any outsider. Combined with her inconsistent statements, suspicion intensified, not only among law enforcement but also online and even among some family members. The person who voiced concerns most openly was Kristen Duda, James's niece. She shared a close bond with her uncle and had known Sarah since infancy. She had loved her deeply. Naturally, that changed after the arrest. After that, Kristen spoke freely. She shared Sarah's eulogy on Facebook accompanied by a pointed comment that read, "After their funeral, when I saw that someone had recorded this, I immediately saved it because I knew that one day everyone would see it for what it was. As I watched the service, I could not help but wonder if I was seeing the person who killed them acting sad about them in public." Does anyone else notice that she is making a crying sound but never tears up? Looking like this, a monster. Horror characters can sometimes be girls in pretty clothes who appear like monsters. Fortunately, that monster gets to trade her dress for an outfit in handcuffs in this case. For Kristen, Sarah seemed off in certain ways. The funeral speech felt unusual, and it was not only family members who noticed. Detectives also found it noteworthy. Police preserved the funeral livestream as evidence and believed Sarah's public actions were more about deflecting suspicion than expressing real sorrow. After turning herself in, she faced charges for 2 murders and 2 counts of aggravated assault and could be prosecuted as an adult, potentially facing life in prison if convicted. In the wake of her arrest, true crime observers raised additional red flags, including reports that she had asked for coverage of the murders. While she seemed to process events through TikTok, it stayed uncertain whether her feelings were authentic, as many wondered if she was chasing sympathy or attention. Despite all this, some continued to back her, especially her father, Daniel, who maintained her innocence and kept raising funds, giving interviews, and affirming his belief. Some argued Sarah was too gentle to be capable of such a crime, and a Facebook support group with over 1,000 members stood behind her. Whispers about her earlier mental health struggles spread, but none have been confirmed, and no definite motive has surfaced. She stays detained after her request for bond was turned down and may remain jailed for months or even years while the evidence is reviewed. Although new details could surface later, the case at this stage leans toward her possible role. Still, views stay split on whether she is guilty or has been mistakenly accused. If you found this case intriguing, remember to like the video and subscribe to the Hidden Cases files. We upload crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.